Some of them crying out for freedom.
Want freedom.
Everybody crying out for democracy. Now it's time to take a stand, yeah.
Come on! Cause this is the revolution.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A special good evening to my colleagues gathered here tonight. A very special good evening to our political leader, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessar, who continues to lead the charge, the defense of our democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, a very, very special good evening to those of you gathered here tonight. Those of you tuned in across our various platforms looking on as you do every Monday, every Sunday. It is a true reflection that there are indeed still good people in Trinidad and Tobago determined to take back our country from this wicked PNM administration. Ladies and gentlemen, as I listen to my colleague MP Michelle Benjamin tonight, as I listen to her talk about mothers crying, the state of our nation as we all look on in horror, there is no doubt in my mind that our UNC soldiers now, more than ever, have to stand in defense of Trinidad and Tobago. Indeed, our country is facing an absolute disaster. Over the past few months, the claws of violent crime has reached our children. We have lost children to gun violence in playgrounds. Trinidad and Tobago, think about that. In playgrounds, our children are being lost to gun violence. We have lost a baby, his life snuffed out innocently while being transported by his parents. Imagine that our children, babies, laying down on the floor, traumatized by gun violence, laying flat in a classroom floor, being told to be quiet in order to be safe. That is where we are right now, Trinidad and Tobago. The sounds of the gunshots rattling right outside the school, and a Minister of National Security telling us, have no fear, it's 200 meters away. You all saw the video. You all saw the babies on the floor. Their teacher urging them to be quiet. And just a few days ago, you all heard about the murder-suicide that forced another school to close. That's 2 in 1 week. Imagine that crime right now in Trinidad and Tobago is forcing communities to close schools. Schools that are universally understood, education being universally understood as an answer to various societal ills. Our crime in our country is forcing communities to close schools. And can you imagine the impact that this scourge is having on the mental health of the next generation of Trinidadians and Tobagonians? Could you imagine growing up, hearing gunshots outside of your school, laying down on the floor underneath your desk? Can you imagine how you are going to grow up in Trinidad and Tobago and you are wondering where school violence comes from? And what is being done? We ask ourselves, what is being done? Today, in the truest form of papi show politics, we saw the Minister of National Security accompanied by an excessive security detail, afraid for himself in the community that he's sending our children to school in. That he went out there to assure persons that indeed it will be safe for you to return to school. But this is one school. Let it not escape us that there are many schools in many communities where these things are taking place. We just happen to see one, but they are happening all over precious Trinidad and Tobago. They are so woefully inept that they would rather move the school out of the community than stand up to the gangs, than stand up for Trinidad and Tobago against gang violence. Removing much needed access to education in a community that faces various socioeconomic ills. That they cannot even think about getting down to the business of solving crime, that they'll say, we'll shut down the school. We will shut down the school because we cannot. They have admitted their failure with respect to crime. So they are surrendering our nation community by community to crime. Community by community, they are surrendering our nation until there will be nothing left. But do you know what is worse than being incapable? Worse than being incapable is being unwilling. Worse than being incapable is being in charge and being unwilling to do anything about it. You listen to Michelle as she counted out the members of the cabinet who ought to be listening to the cries of the mothers. But the members of this cabinet, they cannot be living in Trinidad and Tobago and be so unwilling to solve some of the basic things that are under their remit. The Prime Minister has been very satisfied to say, well, Trinidad and Tobago is a violent place. That means he's given up. TNT is just a violent place. What you worried about? There must be violence in a violent society. The Minister of National Security is satisfied to say that shootings near a school is an everyday occurrence. So what are you worried for? What are you worried about? This happens every day. And the Minister of Education is satisfied to say nothing at all. Imagine that. Very satisfied to stay silent in the face of this trauma. And we remain trapped in a legislative loophole with no real policy, no proactive measures, no policy decisions coming from an executive elected with a mandate to treat with the problems facing our country. Instead, they tell us what? Legislation, paper politics. Listen, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Criminals are criminals because they don't obey laws. So how is the solution? More laws. How is the solution? Bail amendment. Criminals do not obey laws. We have said it time and time again in the United National Congress that we will always support good legislation, legislation that will benefit the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But that being said, the legislation by definition comes into effect after the crime has been committed. These new laws that they come up with and they tell us, listen, this will be the solution to our crime problem. Everyday headlines prove them wrong. Everyday headlines say you are a liar. When you come to us and you tell us this is the solution, you are lying. 500 plus and counting, it says you are a liar. We have called on the government time and time again to tackle the root causes, the root problems, the root causes of crime. Get into the communities. Don't walk about the community. Don't visit the school and leave them and forget about them. Don't go for your photo op and take your picture and then do nothing. When you're sitting down in cabinet, you're talking about HGC housing, but nothing about the root causes of crime. Get into the schools. Get to the young people before they start going down the road, and not to use them as political pawns or put them in your advertisements, but do the actual work. It has been done before. Crime has been below 500 in this country, 500 murders. Personally, I have raised countless times how to use the education sector in our fight against crime. The introduction of conflict resolution within schools. Let us help young people learn how to de-escalate situations. De-escalate before it gets to a violent space. Let us introduce anger management workshops. Extend support to our young citizens to help manage their emotions and their responses to difficult situations. But you know, I can't see a PNM administration including anger management because they need it the most. I've also called for the introduction of things like gender studies, the increased support in social services to make it available in schools. Don't come and tell us time and time again about the all of government approach, and evidently you all don't talk to each other. We don't need new laws to do this. They don't need to come to Parliament to do this. All they need is political will, the ability to do some work, to get up and do some actual work. Unfortunately, we have seen the opposite. And why is that? Because the PNM, at its core, they do not care about the people of Trinidad and Tobago. At their core, they do not care about you. And that is why we are facing the situation that we are in today as a nation now. So rather than implement solutions in our education sector, they have taken away access to opportunities. Our education system has reverted to the haves versus the have-nots. If you have money, you could go. If you don't have, you cannot. Our young people today struggling to access tertiary education, and the government came as a celebration to say, look, we'll give you back what we took away from you 2 years ago. Imagine that. Imagine taking away technical vocational studies, the access to certification, so that if you are not academically inclined, you still had an opportunity, you still had a space to earn a living, a decent wage, to have dignity, the pride of being able to work in this country. They took that away from you. So where would you go? Not the very same gangs? Not the very same space we are now crying out. Where's the space for our young people? They have programs for young men, but you took them away in the beginning. And now you're trying to solve a solution that you in the PNM created. Now we are seeing the disastrous results. We are faced with the consequences of 7 years of an incompetent and unwilling PNM administration, and we wonder why things are the way they are now. It is no surprise to anybody who is paying attention. The digital divide threatens even more to make a situation that is already untenable, unlivable in this country. Because students who did not have are now not able to equitably access education. There is a high cost to removing opportunities from our most vulnerable. There is an extremely high cost, and we are now in the beginning stages of paying the price for PNM incompetence. Things like school transportation remains a problem. Across the Tabakit constituency, children physically cannot get to school. Imagine problems like road infrastructure, physical barriers to getting our children to school. That is where we are in 2022. Imagine that in 2022, when other countries are talking about improving digitization and getting to spaces, we cannot get a road. You saw the video from Michelle. The competition for bad roads in our constituency is amazing. That you physically cannot get from one place to the next, and the PNM still has the audacity to be proud and call this PNM country. No wonder it is collapsing. No wonder it's collapsing. And so today, we have children in St. George's College. You are taking children out of St. George's College because the school is dilapidated and putting them in a space where there are no toilets, there is mold. Imagine that the school that you are putting them into is falling apart. I call on the Minister of Education if she is willing to say anything at this point, whether or not the UTT campus is fit for purpose for St. George's College. How are you going to take them out of a dilapidated building and put them in a worse building after you had 2 years 2 years of online school to deal with school infrastructure? 2 years you did nothing when the children were home, and now you're putting them in worse buildings. That is where we are in 2022. In the constituency of Tabakit, we are facing untold problems. The children in the Guaracaro region, because of a mudslide, every 2 days they cannot get to school because of a mudslide. The same government that could work over the weekend very quickly to file an injunction against teachers, they could not get up and get to work to find a solution to the mudslide that is facing my community right now. That the children in Caratal, they cannot go to school because of the landslip, and what aggravated the landslip is the work of WASA. And then the Minister of Public Utilities will tell us that the landslip caused the water problem, which then made it a little worse, but they can't do anything about the school right now. Unwilling to solve simple problems. Trinidad and Tobago, let us be clear about one thing. You cannot ask people who are unable to solve small problems to deal with small things. Things like road infrastructure, it doesn't require any major high-level thinking, right? It just requires political will and determination. Things like transportation, it does not require any genius level thinking, and they can't get that right. You cannot expect people who cannot solve small problems to solve big problems. You cannot do that. We are walking a dangerous line, Trinidad and Tobago, an exceptionally dangerous line, that every aspect of our society could be crumbling bit by bit. that we are talking about an education sector. In the meanwhile, our communities are being cut out for basic needs. Basic needs. So I say to you tonight, Trinidad and Tobago, it is time for us to stand up for ourselves. The only way our country will get better is to remove this PNM administration. They are the cause of the problem. They cannot be the solution. And so we stand here together, united under one cause, for a better Trinidad and Tobago tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Start turning, your eyes are opening.